That song we just listened to and sang mentioned a few different things. It mentioned seeking religious freedom. And that's part of what Hanukkah is about, religious freedom. Not just freedom, but seeking religious freedom. That was the main issue. And so that we could be free to believe just the way they wanted to. That's what it said in the song. Free to believe just the way they wanted to. And that's what it's about, that we are able to be free to believe the way we want to. That's the key for Hanukkah. There's a lot of other aspects to it. We'll be covering some of that. But this is really the underlying thing which is often missed and overlooked. It had to do with religious freedom, the freedom to worship God as we wanted to. So to understand Hanukkah, we need to go back quite a ways. We're going to go back all the way to David and Solomon and zip all the way up. But David provided the funds and the blueprints for the temple in Jerusalem. Solomon then comes along, his son, and actually builds it. And it remains there for several hundred years until the Romans come through. The Babylonians come through, thank you. The Babylonians come through and destroy it. Now, a very interesting prophecy takes place. A prophet Daniel is alive during this time when the Babylonians come in and destroy the temple and take us, the majority of us, captive to Babylon. And while he's there in Babylon, Daniel receives a message. The king actually receives a dream, but Daniel interprets it. And it is a picture of a statue, and he outlines the history of what is going to take place over the next several hundred years, actually all the way to the end of time. We're not going that far tonight. So starting with Babylon, so we had David, Solomon, the temple there for several hundred years. Babylon comes in, rules over Israel, destroys the temple, takes us captive. Then the Persians come along. This is all prophecy from here on out as far as Daniel was concerned. Daniel prophesies, the Persians are going to come along and take over the Babylonians. And they do. And they come in, and under the Persians, we were given the privilege to go back to Israel and go back and rebuild the temple. And that's what we did. It's listed in the books of the Bible, Nehemiah and Ezra. And so we rebuild the temple, and we begin worshiping in it, but we're still under the auspices of the Persians to a certain extent. Then the Greeks come along, just as again prophesied, and the Greeks come and the Greeks take over the Persians. And the Greeks allowed us to have religious freedom, but we were still under their rule, and under Alexander the Great. And then after Alexander the Great, his kingdom divides into 4 sections, and we are ruled under the Greeks. And that's where the Hanukkah story takes place. And then after the Greeks, the Romans come in, and the Romans take over where the Greeks were ruling over. And we're going to get a little bit into that, but the primary story of Hanukkah takes place during this Greek rulership time in history. And the Hanukkah takes place about the year 200 or so BC, about 200 years BCE, before the Common Era, give or take, that it's taking place. Antiochus Epiphanes was the king of the Syrians at that time. Epiphanes means the God's beloved, and that's a name that he came up for himself. He named himself that. He was a very humble man, the God's beloved, and wanted total rulership and dominion. But the Jews called him Epimanes, which means madman, and that's very much how he was. Jochanan was the Kohen Gadol, the high priest in the temple at the time, but Antiochus had him removed, and had his position replaced. Later on, Jochanan was murdered because even though he wasn't the Kohen Gadol, he continued to speak out regarding the idolatry that was taking place. Under the Greek rules, one of the things that Alexander instituted was to Hellenize, or to bring Greek culture to all the world, all the nations, all the areas that he was capturing, and with the hope of it taking over into the whole world. So again, after him, his successors on down the line, and we're several years past Alexander by the time we get to this section in history. But they continued that Hellenization And so that was still trying to be forced onto the Jewish people. Initially, it was a choice. Israel was, and the Jewish people, we were given a lot of leeway to not follow that if we wanted to. Alexander was very friendly, it seems historically, to the Jewish people, but his successors were not so much. And Antiochus was one of the worst, if not the worst. When Antiochus was away warring in Egypt, the Jewish people rebelled against his changing of the guard in the temple and the high priest, and so they chased out his high priest and put in their own again. And while Antiochus was there in Egypt, word came from Rome, and this is where Rome is starting now to put in its influence. It was around 168 or so BCE. Rome comes in and says, no. They became an ally of Egypt, and they said to Antiochus, leave Egypt alone, which again just shows that Rome was beginning to exert its power in the world. Some people look at Antiochus as this mighty fulfillment of a mighty king and great mighty, but he really wasn't. As we'll see, he doesn't even totally conquer the Jewish people. The Jewish people were able to revolt and win, as we'll get to the end of the story. But the Romans were also pushing him around. And he didn't even win over the Egyptians. So he was not this mighty ruler. He was really just a madman and wanting control and not strong enough politically to be able to keep control. And so when Rome told him to leave Egypt and he had to do so, he was infuriated. And the only way to get back home was to go through Israel. And Israel became the crossroads. Again, when Greek divided into these four sections, Egypt was under one of its control, and North Syria area was under one of its control. And those two parts of Greece were fighting against each other all the time, and Israel was stuck in the middle. And so you had the Egyptian occupation, you had the Syrian occupation, and Israel being the crossroads. And so he was going back up north through the crossroads and came through Israel. And he had heard what we had done to his high priest. He was already angry to begin with, and so he became even more outraged, and he sent his army down to Jerusalem, slaughtering thousands of Jewish people just for, again, really just kicking the cat because he had a bad day at work, basically, but a whole lot worse than kicking the cat. He slaughtered thousands of people, and then he began to impose his rule over the Jewish people even more, outlawing circumcision, outlawing Sabbath rest and observance, trying to outlaw our dietary laws, and even putting a statue of Zeus into the temple that was originally the place where Solomon built the temple and where Nehemiah and Ezra had rebuilt the temple. In that very temple, he took out the items that God had told us to place in there, the Ark of the Covenant, the menorah, and the other pieces of furniture, and he replaced them with idols, and again including an idol to Zeus, not only for his own worship and his army soldiers' worship, but he was wanting the Jewish people to worship these idols as well. And they were having an influence. Many people did begin to worship these idols, and it was becoming a big problem. Some of the servants is the type of things that they would do. One story is that the Syrians went to a rabbi, an older rabbi, 90 years old, Eleazar, and tried to get him to eat pork as a demonstration to the village that he was rejecting the Torah and rejecting God and was accepting the Greek customs. And he refused to do so. And so they said, well, you don't have to actually eat the pork. If you just put it to your mouth, that'll be good enough. They were hoping the people would think that he was eating it, and then they could influence and get the other people to submit. And he refused to do that as well, and so they killed him. And that was the type of stuff that they were doing. And so he stood for his faith and was murdered. So Antiochus' army went from village to village, and many people died as martyrs in standing for their faith. Again, we were under rulership of other countries. Again, Babylon, Persia, and Greece for many years without a problem. We didn't revolt against that. It wasn't just freedom that the Hanukkah story is about, but it's when our religious beliefs came under attack. When we were no longer allowed to freely practice the scriptures, that's when it became an issue. You know, the straw that broke the camel's back, that's when it became a willing to die for issue. Because a lot of people try and tag on to the Hanukkah story and make it theirs as well. And every freedom fighter wants to say, oh yeah, well Hanukkah stands for what I'm doing too. Well again, it wasn't just fighting for political freedom, it wasn't just fighting for economic freedom, it was fighting for religious freedom. And that's the main issue. Again, we went a long time under other oppressive rules that we put up with. Okay, we're going to listen to a song, Light One Candle. This song is by Peter, Paul, and Mary. How many people ever heard of Peter, Paul, and Mary? Okay, you're showing your age. All right. But they wrote a song about Hanukkah, and you'll hear they mention part of the Hanukkah theme. But again, they kind of take it and they hijack it a little bit and try and make it more of a, again, a political freedom thing. But it, as I say, the issue was not just freedom. It wasn't just the 60s movement wanting to have long hair or whatever. It had to do with religious freedom that the Maccabees were willing to die for. But at least they give honor to Hanukkah, and it's a nice song. Yeah.
Exist was denied. Light one candle for the terrible sacrifice justice and freedom demand. But light one candle for the wisdom to know when the peacemaker's time is at hand. Don't let the light go out, it's lasted for so many years. Don't let the light go out, let it shine through our love and our tears. Light one candle for the strength that we need to never become our own foe. And light one candle for those who are suffering, pain we learned so long ago. Light one candle for all we believe in, that anger not tear us apart. Light one candle to bind us together with peace as a song in our heart. Don't let
again, they didn't mention religion. They mentioned, the fighting for the right to live free, and that's their theme, of the living free. And that was part of the story, certainly. But the crux of it, and again, the last straw, the issue was religious freedom. And that's what it should be for us, too. And as we live out our lives, we can live under a lot of suffering, a lot of persecution, a lot of problems, and go along as much as possible with whatever government rule we are under, as the Scriptures encourage us to do. When Paul wrote about, Rabbi Paul wrote about submitting to Rome at that time, he was talking about Nero. Nero was even worse than Antiochus in a lot of ways. I mean, talk about a mad man. And he said, submit to them, again, unless it comes down to compromising the Bible, compromising the Scriptures, compromising God's law. That's where the line gets drawn. That's the red line. That was the red line for the issue at the Hanukkah story. Okay, in that song, they mentioned the Maccabee children. Peter, Paul, and Mary, they mentioned the Maccabee children. So who are these Maccabee children? Well, the army of Antiochus, the Syrians, were going village to village, and they eventually entered the village of Modin. And in this town, the religious leader, the Levite, the priest, was named Mattathias, and they tried to get him to offer a sacrifice to their gods. I forget if it was a pig or whatever the issue was, but it wasn't a biblical thing they were asking him to do. And he refused, and he had 5 sons. He called for his sons and anyone else in the town who was willing to stand, and they fought off those soldiers that came into town and killed a few and chased the rest of them away. And they knew that the army was going to now come back and punish that town. And so they got out of town and went into the hills and hid and began a mercenary army, in a sense, to fight against the Syrian occupation. One of the things, I guess a quote from Mattathias, he said, "I and my sons, my brothers, are determined to remain loyal to the covenant which our God made with our ancestors." So he stood for the faith in what God had ordained for us to follow. Now, the term Maccabee wasn't their last name. It's a term that comes from it's an acronym that is put together from a phrase, and the phrase is Micha Mocha Bolim Adonai. And it's a song or a prayer that we say here. And you take the first letter, there it is in Hebrew as well, and if you take the first letter of each one of those words, the Mem, the Chaf, the Bet, and the Aleph, and you get the word, putting whatever the vowels in, you come up with Maccabee from that. And so that's how the term Maccabee comes from, that they stood loyal to God. Again, the term means Micha Mocha Bolim Adonai, who is like unto thee among the gods, O Lord. Who is like unto God? Among all the other gods of this world, who is like unto thee? There's no one like unto him. So that's where the term Maccabees came from. Okay, so let's sing this Micha Mocha prayer song together. one day Mattathias gathered his friends and his 5 sons together, he realized his age was coming and his time was coming. And so he said to them, I feel that my last day is drawing near. Let my son Judah, the oldest one, let my son Judah lead you to victory against the enemies of God. Though you may be greatly outnumbered, despair not. Put your faith in God. Remember David, who fearlessly faced Goliath. Trust in God. Remember Elijah, who stood up alone against the false prophets. He who answered them in their hour of peril shall answer you now. Fear not. Put your faith in God. It's a good message for us as well. Again, a godly man, spiritual man. We're not just talking about, again, a warrior. We're talking about godly men. He was Levite, but also following God. And the issue had to do with their passion for God, their love for God, and that passion and love and obedience to God being restricted by an outside source. So soon after that time, Mattathias did die, and Judah took over. Judah was referred to as the hammer, strong man. And we're going to now listen to another song. I think you'll be able to sing with this one. It's pretty fast-paced, but there's words that go along with it. Not all the words are what he is saying. Some of the words are just explaining some things. And so you want to read all the words if you can. They move pretty quickly. And so get your eyes up to speed. And it's a tribute to Judah Maccabee, this song. It's actually a parody of a song that was about Mozart. And the song was called Amadeus, and Rock Me Amadeus. So this is Rock Me Maccabees.
Maccabee for Chanukah. He was a rebel with a cause and he would never say die. He was a fearless, faithful fighter and a Jewish guy. There was a song about to start, it was the rhythm in his heart. So the people screamed, come on, Rocky Maccabees. He was a superstar, he was so popular. The people stopped to stare because he had such flair. He was charismatic like a cool rock star. His fans would stand and shout, come on, Rocky Maccabees.
Maccabees, 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 Maccabees.
Oh, come on, Rocky Maccabees.
Maccabees, 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 Maccabees. Maccabees.
Hey! He never cared about the Greeks and their oppressive rules. He vowed to take the soldiers down and make them look like fools. He was no slave to the grind, he had the temple on his mind. He wanted freedom of religion, not submission or derision. He was a superstar, he was so popular. The people stopped to stare because he had such flair. He had a charisma, he was a rockin' Hebrew hammer. So his fans cried out, come on, rock me Maccabees.
Maccabees, 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 Maccabees. Maccabees.
Come on, rock me Maccabees.
Maccabees, 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 Maccabees.
Oh, come and rock me Maccabees. Oh, 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 oh. Come and rock me Maccabees. Oh, 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 oh. Come on, rock me. Come on, rock me Maccabees. Come on, rock me Maccabees.
again, the words that he put in there, pretty accurate description of what Judah was like, Judah Maccabee. And again, it mentioned in the song that it wanted religious freedom. And that was what the fight was about. And it wasn't an easy fight. They were greatly outnumbered. One of the things the Syrians imposed on us, where we were not allowed to have any weapons, no bearing of arms. And so basically with farm instruments, we're fighting against a mighty nation. Again, it's the Syrians who, or the Greek and Syrians, same thing there, took over the Persians who had taken over Babylon, a powerful, powerful nation. Now, Rome is coming in even more powerful at this time, but it was a powerful, powerful nation with a huge territory. They had elephants that they would bring into battles with them. They would put something like 10 people on top of these elephants and shoot arrows down on the enemy. So it was again, it would be like, say the American Indians revolting against the United States, at this kind of a junction here in analogy. And that is exactly what happened. Antiochus sent his men to wipe out Judah and his followers. They were greater in number and equipment, yet they were defeated by the Maccabees. And so Antiochus would send out another troop, which would also be defeated, and he'd send out a large army, even up to 40,000 men, 40,000 fighters against these, again, farmers and priests, Levites, Kohanim, that were fighting for more than their just existence, but fighting to be able to worship God against this mighty, oppressive regime. One of the things Judah told them, his fighters, "Have no fear, for it isn't our weapons that defeated the enemy in the past, but faith in God, He will fight on our side. It's not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord." David said, do not trust in horses, do not trust in chariots, but trust in the name of the Lord our God. And that's the principle, and that's what made the difference in their battle and their striving to win and their victory over these huge armies that would come and attack them. They were eventually able to get to Jerusalem and liberate the temple. They took all the idols that were inside and cleansed them out, dumped them, destroyed them, and began to replace it back with the pieces of furniture that God ordained that we should put in there. And what do you think was the first piece of furniture that they restored and put in there? The Ark of the Covenant, the altar, the menorah, table of showbread. Well, there's only 7. We keep guessing, we'll eventually get it. Yeah, the Ark of the Covenant was missing. That was taken and hidden. No one knows where it is today, and it was taken already before then, during the Babylonian time. So it wasn't the Ark of the Covenant, nor was it the menorah, which was expecting the popular answer, because that's what Hanukkah has, all the menorah and candle lights. But it was right here said the altar. And of course, there's 2 altars, so that was good to guess that one, because you get either one of those, higher chance. But right, the brazen altar, the altar for sacrificing. This is not what that altar looked like, but it's just an altar for sacrificing, and so that they could sacrifice the lambs, because that was the purpose of the sanctuary. That is the majority of what took place in the sanctuary, was this sacrificing of these animals in order to receive forgiveness of sins. Because the Torah states, Moses wrote, without the shedding of blood, without blood there is no forgiveness of sins. That it is the blood that affects expiation, that it is the blood of the animals, the blood of the sacrifice that grants us forgiveness, that sets us free. And so that was a very important part, maybe the most important part. Certainly the Ark of the Covenant is a very important part, and maybe the most important part. But the Ark of the Covenant, unless it had the blood sprinkled on it on Yom Kippur, it was also defiled. And so you still needed the altar and as an integral part of the sanctuary. And so they restored the altar so they could start having sacrifices again. Again, it wasn't just to liberate the city. It wasn't to be able to put a Walmart up on the corner or something like that they wanted. It was so that they could worship God. And so when they gained the victory, they rededicated the temple. And that's the theme of Hanukkah, rededicating the temple. We'll get more into that whole aspect of it next week, but the rededicating of the temple, it was to worship God. And if God did not use the Maccabees, and this is taking place about 168, I believe, or so, BCE, if God did not use them to liberate the temple and to bring worship back into the temple, when the Messiah came to that very temple, it would not have been worshiping God. There would have been an idol of Zeus there. It would have been a whole different scenario. So God needed to liberate the people, liberate so we could worship right, so that we could worship truly, and so that the Messiah could come into his temple, his house of prayer. So they played a very intricate role in that, so that the sacrifices that had been done there for hundreds of years could continue to point forward and find their fulfillment in the Messiah, who gives us the forgiveness of sins, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Crucial part of the Hanukkah story. Often overlooked. Even the Talmud doesn't get into a whole about the war and the victory too much. It focuses on another aspect that, again, we'll talk about next week. Even in the Bible, in the Jewish Bible, in the Jewish Tanakh, the stories of 1st and 2nd Maccabee, which go over the story of the war, is not even included in the Tanakh, nor in the Protestant versions of the Bible. It is in the Catholic version of the Bible, but it's not in the Protestant or the Jewish version of the Bible. Why would they leave that out? There could be several reasons. Maybe because during our years of being under occupation under Rome and all like that, to be focusing on a war against our oppressive taskmasters might not be a great thing to be advertising all the time. Some believe because when the Maccabees, Judah does eventually die, and his next brother takes over, and then he dies in war, and another brother takes over. Because even after they liberated the temple, they were still continue warring with the Greeks, with the Syrians. That eventually, one of the brothers not only makes himself the high priest, but also makes himself king. And you have no longer the separation of a state and religion, no more balance of powers. And that was a big issue. And so they might not wanted to include their story. I don't know exactly why, but there are a couple different reasons possibly for not including it. But the main thing that they wanted was religious freedom that Mattathias set up for them. And then Judah and the others followed. And they were able to do that, to liberate, rededicate the temple so that the Messiah could come to that very temple. So it's a very important part for us, a very important part of history for us as believers today. And so they did then put the menorah in, and there's a whole story about the menorah, which we'll get into next week. This is the territory that the Maccabees were able to liberate, and called the Hasmonean Kingdom. And this here is a coin that they minted, putting their stamp on it, the menorah. So again, the menorah was a very important part, a symbol of the sanctuary. So they put that onto their coins. Actually, they took other coins. They took Syrian coins and reminted on top of them. They weren't minting their own. They did not last very long. Again, from 168, then in 68, the Romans do fully come in and take over the Syrians as well as the Hasmonean Kingdom. So it only lasted about 100 years. I'd like to share a Hanukkah story with you. It's written in the first person, and I don't have here who it's written by, but I'm going to read it in the first person as it was written. It was our first big celebration as a family since our second son's bris, 8 years earlier. Our son Alan was becoming a bar mitzvah. We had a fun idea for how to celebrate it. We had been married years earlier on a boat in Manhattan. And since Eliza was born on our first anniversary, we thought we would do it again. So we hired a boat and invited a small group of mostly relatives and classmates. In planning the food and the flowers and the music, there seemed to be something missing. We had the bar, but where was the mitzvah? Aside from my son's Devar Torah, the speech, what could we do to elevate this gathering from being just another birthday party? Providentially, there was a request in our synagogue to pray for a local soldier who was being deployed to Iraq. The idea was born, let's have all the kids at our Simcha, at the celebration, make Hanukkah cards to send to the Jewish soldiers overseas. Nothing earth-shattering, but just a way to inject some meaning into the festival. The date arrived and our ship sailed. God granted us a perfect September day. And after the carefully prepared speech blew overboard, our son ad-libbed and did still just a fine job. The Hanukkah cards were written and colored and decorated, and a lovely time was had by all. The next day, the cards were mailed out with heartfelt wishes and love to our Jewish brothers and sisters. End of story. Or at least so we thought. 6 months later, when the bar mitzvah was a fond, distant memory, my doorbell rang. I unlocked the door, and even though I didn't recognize the voice on the other side, I was surprised to see a pleasant 20-something-year-old greeting me. I'm Lieutenant Steinberg, and your son sent me a Hanukkah card when I was in Iraq. Oh, you could have blown me over with a feather. But it even gets better. Apparently, our few dozen cards had been thrown in with hundreds and thousands of cards sent to celebrate the other December holiday. The chaplain showed up one day at the army base with an enormous sack filled to the brim with cards and letters. As he passed out handfuls of cards to the grateful troops, Lieutenant Steinberg was hanging back, feeling pretty out of place and lonely. Suddenly, amidst the celebratory crowd, the company captain noticed our soldier. "Steinberg, why are you so quiet? How come you're not opening any cards?" "Oh, brother," Steinberg thought, "don't they get it? Captain, I'm Jewish, remember?" "Come on, Steinberg, don't be a spoil sport. Take a card." Steinberg tried to shrink himself into invisibility, but the captain wasn't having any of it. "Let's go, Steinberg. These people were nice enough to write to us. Now take a card." By now, the captain had everyone's attention, and Steinberg was getting pretty uncomfortable in the spotlight. Quick, he told himself, just grab a Christmas card, and you'll stop being the center of attention. Steinberg reached deep into the sack, pulled out a card, and looked at it. To his complete and utter shock, the return address said Wheatley, New York. Steinberg is from Wheatley, New York as well. Handshaking, he tore open and found a beautiful handmade Chanukah card, signed by my son, the bar mitzvah boy himself. Steinberg was dumbfounded by the providence of it all. He broke out in a huge grin, holding his card high in the air and shouted, "Look, guys, I got a Hanukkah card, and it's from my hometown." Everyone understood the small miracle they had just witnessed. Standing there in my Wheatley, New York home, with my mouth gaping open and tears in my eyes, I begged Steinberg to come back and retell the story when my children were home. Indeed, he did return the following week. For our family, it was an incredible inspiration to see so clearly the power of our little mitzvah. God wants us to share the story, share the miracle, share the importance of worshiping God, share the importance of having a lamb sacrifice for us, share the importance of having a substitute in our place, share the importance of a God Almighty who loves us with an everlasting love, who knows us in our heartaches, in our loneliness, in our isolated areas of life, knows us in our minority situation, but has not taken his eyes off of us. We're the apple of his eye. He loves us with an everlasting love. And he calls us to share that love with others around the world. He calls us to stand for our faith, to not be ashamed of our faith, to practice our faith here and now in peaceful America, and to be prepared to stand when times change and we don't have the freedoms that we have today. Starts practicing now, so that when that time comes, we will be able to stand. We will be able to stand faithful to God. We'll be able to stand like Eliezer, that Jewish rabbi. Be able to stand like Mattathias. Be able to stand faithful to God. Be a shining light. How is God asking us to share his light? Maybe it's sending some cards. We've got some Hanukkah cards in the back. Maybe it's sending some cards. Maybe it's letting our light shine in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's handing one of the postcards an invitation to Hanukkah to someone we know. Today I got my haircut. You like my haircut? And I asked him if I could put a stack of the cards down on the table there. Oh, yes, sure, fine. I put a bunch of them down there. Carlos and Awilda invited Jeff and Dory to services tonight. Met them at a Walmart. We can all invite somebody. We can all meet people. Let God's light shine. Send the cards out. You can take a card, maybe you know someone, put their address on it, put a stamp on it, and mail it out. Ways that we can get the message out. God's calling us to share and let our light shine. Maybe it's taking your Hanukkah menorah and putting it in the window so that it can be seen. None of it's candles, right? Yeah, you don't want to burn your window pane and your shade. We've got some electric ones in the back there as well, so you can get an electric one. Letting the world know about a God who's an almighty God, who has sustained us down through the ages, who has seen us through tough times and good times, individually, personally, as well as corporately as a people of God. The statistics of how we have survived this long is astronomical. And Hanukkah is just one of those points in time where God sustained us and used faithful people to do so. And God's calling us to be those faithful people again. As we pray tonight, and God impresses your mind on some way, shape, or form, he's calling you to let God's light shine. Let's ask him to give his spirit, his courage, his strength to do so. Our Lord and our God, King of the universe, we are thankful, Lord, for the religious freedoms we have in this country. Thank you for the people who've gone before us and set the stage for it. Thank you for this precious gift that we have. Lord, may we cherish it and make use of it in worshiping you and following you and obeying you. Lord, give us the courage to stand in the future when these rights are attempted to be taken away. Give us the courage to follow you even unto death if necessary. And Lord, while we have time to share your word and share your love and share your message, give us the courage and the strength to do so and press our minds who you want us to share it with, who you want us to talk to, who you want us to interact with, and how you want us to let your light shine. Lord, we are thankful for the sacrifice. We are thankful for the sanctuary. We're thankful for the altar. We're thankful for the lambs. We're thankful for as they pointed forward to the Messiah. And Yeshua, we're thankful that you came as that lamb, became that sacrifice, and have provided forgiveness for us. In Yeshua's holy name, amen.